Hello, and welcome to what is part 2 of an introduction to Blood, Sweat and Tears. Disturbing enough, take 3. It's now 5:05, so I sincerely doubt this will be going up before the video. I might have it uploaded into the system though, so make it go live once the video's over tonight. Well. I will be making sure it's uploaded while I'm talking to everyone. So, it of course is me again. Hello, and it is. If I can just orientate that back a bit more. God, that was a very fast wave. What was paid for in blood, sweat, and tears, and so much money. So much money. Really was. I should probably bring this a lot closer. I will do. Hello. And let's start without much further ado. See if we can this record it. Now, today, part 2 is procurement. Part 2 is wars are fought with what is available, which itself is often less than what is owned, and figures that are probably also less than what is procured. The nature of it is that the equipment you had at the beginning of the war is probably what you're going to, whatever remains of it is what you're going to be fighting the end of the war with. Whatever you likely get to build during the war, well, that's going to depend on A, how long the war lasts for. If it's a few weeks, a few days, a few months, a few years. There's no chance of the Royal Navy having a crash build program in 1982 for the Falklands War. But curiously enough, World War II, when they could have done a crash build program, you have things being suspended for 2 years at the beginning of the war because the view is it will be over soon. Why, after the experience of the First World War, they had that, I do not know. I say that wasn't the view of everyone. People had different reasons for doing it, but it's one of the biggest views you have coming through. It's now raining outside quite heavily. Well, I have pizza and I have iron brew, so I have everything I need for this evening's nice long discussion on this stuff. Let's see what we can do next. The Battle of the River Plate. Now, why have I got this here? Why is this part of the procurement discussion? Because so much of procurement, especially these days, you hear about, are you procuring this because it's not as good as that? The nicest way, not a single one of those 3 ships that the Royal Navy was putting into battle against the Graf Spee, not a single one, should have come anywhere near her on paper. But she's 3 on 1. That's the thing. So yes, even when Exeter is de facto knocked out the fight and looking at that picture of the turret, and by the way, if you want to have more information about this stuff, please do go to the Battle of the River Plate series. I've got lots of videos from when I did the 80th anniversary stuff on Twitter from that and all sorts of things there. The Admiral Graf Spee, what I always find interesting is the report the Uruguayans put together. This is the damage they have to list. But they also have amendments where they're saying we think there's far more damage they weren't allowing us to see. We think there's damage they're not allowing us to see. We think this ship is more damaged than it is. But Langsdorff has a problem. He can't plead the crippled ship card, and even if he does, that really doesn't help him because whilst, yes, he might get the Glasgow option, which is months and months in dry dock being fixed that she got in Brazil. Well, definitely a few weeks. In World War One, after that was the HMS Glasgow World War One, after the Battle of Cornell, and before the Battle of the Falklands, I think, or was it after the Battle of the Falklands as well? I'm trying to rush this too quickly, so I'm not going to think of that one in time. But the trouble was, he has back home, in the name of all things political and propaganda, saying no damage was done, our ship is fine, it's perfect, and it's really not. And also you have the idea going around, well, the 6-inch guns didn't do any damage. They did a lot of damage. They did. Okay, so you've got thick armor which will defend you against things, but what isn't? Radars are covered by armor. Communication systems are not covered by armor. Apparently the water system is not covered by armor, and considering her engines, her crew, everything depends on her ability to produce fresh water, this ship is... So the thing is, here's the point. If your enemy does produce a super ship, you don't necessarily have to worry as long as you're producing ships which are good enough in enough numbers. But that means you have to have them in enough numbers. Quality does not always counterbalance quantity. Quality can counterbalance quantity when quantity is of a sufficiently low standard. 100% solution can probably beat many 10 to 20 to 50% solutions. But 100% solution is not going to necessarily comfortably beat several 70% or 80% solutions, which brings us to our next slide, which has now come up next to me for the last few seconds. The Cold War. Now, the examples I'm giving from the Cold War here for procurement are the Type 22 frigates. Now, I have a lot of time for these, provided it's a certain batch. Batch 3, the broad-beamed Type 22, is probably one of the most well-balanced designs that came out of the Royal Navy in the Cold War era. They are supremely well-balanced general-purpose ships, and they make up for the Type 42s, the remaining Type 22s, and probably what had happened to the Type 12s. In other words, they are the ships which make the Royal Navy suddenly look like it's got its stuff together in terms of design and procurement policy. They're good. What's missing from the Batch 1 and Batch 2s? Well, the Cold War takes place in the missile age. Missiles are king. Missiles are going to rule the world. You don't need guns. Notice what's reappeared in Batch 3? A gun. Falklands War experience. Not just a deck gun. She's also had a Dutch goalkeeper close-in weapon system fitted. She's got harpoon rather than exocet. She is longer. Her bow's been modified. All sorts of things. So, your first frigate, your Type 22 Batch 1s, they are anti-submarine warfare / air point defense vessels. They have no real abilities beyond that. Yes, they carry exocets, but that's about it. Your Batch 2s are not much better, but they're slightly longer. Your Batch 3s, your broadbeam Type 22s, yeah, they're the ships you want in a firefight. Now, the USN submarines. Here's the thing. Type 22 frigates are built in a period when everyone's working out how to fight the North Atlantic, when you're going to be fighting against submarines and heavy bombers. And therefore, why do you need a big deck gun? Why do you need a close-in weapon system when the missiles coming in are that big that even if you do frag them, they're still going to do massive damage to your ship? They make sense in a scenario. But the trouble is, if you're procuring for just one scenario and you find yourself doing another scenario, you're in a problem. post-Cold War, the US Navy has the same issue. They think, oh, we've got a peace dividend. Let's slow down submarine production. Let's cut Seawolves because they're massively expensive and build Virginias, which will be cheaper and get it. And we've got the budget restrictions and we've got war on terror and all sorts of things to think about, which is all perfectly understandable. Trouble is, now you're facing off against China, which has a resurgent submarine fleet, which is which is heavily investing in area denial. And oh yes, your Ohio class SGNs aren't going to last forever, and you've only got 3 Seawolves, of which one of them is a SEAL insertion vehicle, and the other two, basically your Special Forces submarine, and the other 2 are your premier hunter killers. It's a short-term decision. What would have been possibly more sensible would have been to keep a low-rate production of Seawolves going and produce Virginias alongside them. And this is a navy which could certainly talk about that. The Venetian Empire. Venetian Empire is one of those things which is really interesting. I love studying them, and I have done since I was taught about them by Professor Glenn Richardson at St Mary's University College, where I did my bachelor's. Made us all get this book. Venice, a documentary history, 1450 to 1630. Venice is a really interesting story because in many ways they remind me of Britain, and they remind me of Japan, and to extent of America, in that they become first the merchant. They have to become a maritime power because of their scenario. In Venice's case, they are in the middle of a swamp or lagoon, which provides them with security against the ravaging hordes breaking up the Roman Empire. I know it's not quite like that. I know, please, medieval historians do not descend. I do realize it's more complicated than that, and I agree, it's far more complicated and far more interesting than that, but let's just go for the broad strokes. Yeah, basically the Venetians are, to an extent, refugees who've found a safe place to build a home. And as they build their home and as they start spreading out, they are worried about their security, so they build a navy. Because with their island status and all these things, they are fairly secure from sieges as long as they can maintain trade in and out of their home, as long as they can have people going in and out and things going in and out, and they can do well with sort of banking and other things, they can do well. And the arsenal is what they build is key to this. It's part storage area, part shipyard, part everything for maintaining your navy. And they maintain a huge navy of galleys, which, believe it or not, they try to maintain by a volunteer force. Eventually, they do end up with slavery, conscripts, and all sorts of things also filling in the ranks. But that's because they grow it massively, and frankly, you need to. And no one really wants to be an oarsman, no matter how much you pay them for a galley. But it's good money. And as you can probably hear, the fluffy research assistant is getting involved and complaining that he is not up here. He's not up here because I have pizza up here. And he would have eaten the pizza if I left him have a chance. The trouble is for the Venetians is as the world changes. Now, galleys remain a very good method of fighting wars in the Mediterranean, where there is sometimes less wind than others, and galleys will always guaranteed rate of progress. However, as your naval battles slowly become less about engaging closely and more about artillery drills, you have to move towards what is the man of war or ship of the line, frigates, or whatever you want to call the various rated sailing ships that you're building. And the Venetians try and maintain both and sort of build up a fleet. But you have Napoleon, you have all sorts of empires rising and falling and wandering around at this point, and the poor Venetians do not sink very quickly from being the number one power in the Mediterranean to being a very, very much middle ranking and then even a lower power. Because Their whole system had been built around the advantages that galleys and their access to wood and their scenario, a lagoon, and they could give them, and also the fact that they had built up a huge stock of galleys. They could quickly man them. This comes to something else. So, this is an idea I want you to think about, because when we look around the world and we talk about these things, I know I have a particular friend who really loves the concept of arsenal ships. Well, this is my version of looking at that. In 1907, you have the US Navy's Great White Fleet sailing around the world. It is beautiful. It is majestic. It is impressive, awe-inspiring. It is yesterday's news and is already out of date as it's going around the world. Because that thing was launched in 1906. HMS Dreadnought. The thing is, how many people realized that she was going to completely and had completely erased them overnight? So much power traditionally looked like the ironclads that had grown into the ironclads. And I often dispute this idea of changing from ironclad to dreadnought with dreadnought, because it's not a clear-cut transition by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, honestly, I would say some of the cruisers of the ironclad age were far better proportioned than some of the cruisers of the dreadnought age, well, at least the early ones. The thing is, the Great White Fleet is massive, awe-inspiring, and still very, very impressive, even though Dreadnought has launched. So even though Dreadnought has been in the water for a year, even though all the major navies in the world know about Dreadnought, they are still impressed by the Great White Fleet. The Great White Fleet is still power. So this is something to think about in procurement. Just because there's something new out there doesn't mean that what you have already doesn't have value. And doesn't mean that the Great White Fleet isn't actually useful, because honestly, if you had put them all in a single one-on-one fight with HMS Dreadnought, they'd have broken down. No, no, they actually were very reliable, but they would have had a hell of a time, and I'm not sure who would have won. It would certainly have been an interesting battle to watch, the whole Great White Fleet versus HMS Dreadnought. But the really big thing I find annoying in this picture is because, in many ways, it was coming of the grey. I like the Great White Fleet. I like the white ships of presence and of imperial policing, or whatever you want to call it, in the interwar period. They are impressive. They are statesmanlike. They have a value because of that. The white both makes them look more impressive and at the same time is disarming. Dreadnought is grey. Dreadnought is a battleship through and through. Dreadnought is about war. Dreadnought is about fighting. That is what she is. That is what she must be assessed as, and that is what her advantage in life is. But it's also perhaps her, bug to bear. But it all comes into procurement. For Britain, we had a fleet even larger than the Great White Fleet of pre-dreadnoughts. And yet we threw it all away to build HMS Dreadnought. Why? Because Britain had to be number one. So they had to be the best. Which is why when people turn around to me and go, the Zumwalts weren't worth it, I go, the Zumwalts were, because they show the US Navy's still the best for design and development in the world. Well, now let's see. What have I got coming up in July? What am I looking forward to? Ooh. Honestly, the one I'm looking forward most to is flying boats and seaplanes, because that's a subject I haven't looked at years. I've got a great big book somewhere around about it. But also there's the back pocket cruisers. That's basically me going to be talking about tribals, battles, and darings. What won't I enjoy about that? Anyway, it's just going to be fun. Fun. Let's see. And the patron vote options. Well, I will not prejudice anything, but I will say currently, the one in the lead is the CIA Royal Navy operations in the Indian Ocean from 1941 to 1943, when I last checked, and at Brad, the politics of Anglo-German naval race, and at Inhappy, the interwar development of convoy doctrines, and at Inhappy, putting warehouses at the end of World War One for end of World War One for World War Two, are all absolutely joint second. So I love you, my patrons. Only currently 18 of the 28 of you have voted, and currently at the moment, you are causing me to have a joyous scenario of having to possibly do a tiebreaker vote, and I didn't want to. These are all amazing, and I would quite happily have loved to do them all, which is why I was making you pick them. It was all about me being lazy. No. I'd happily do it. As I said, I'd happily do any of them. And actually, the reason Inhappy has two is because that Inhappy put that together as really one question, and I thought as one question you can't do in a presentation, but I didn't want to, chop and change their question around, so I turned it into two, and all five of them are excellent, and I'll be happy to do any two of them. I am quite surprised that Draken Fennell hasn't been packing it to make sure that his one got the choice. But that just shows, again, how lucky I am in my friends and how good a chap he is. That he hasn't, But no, it is the politics of the Anglo-German naval race, interwar development convoys, and putting warehousing in World War I for World War II are running second. Indian Ocean from 1941 to 1943 is currently in first place, and last place is how far can you push it? Oh. And that was part 2, which has been a lot quicker, this take, than part 1 was. But, part 2 is more of a long speech rather than part 1 is more incidents. Take care, and I am going to save this, and then I am going to get ready for the live, which is in about 30 minutes. Enjoy.